Welcome to the Raising Empowered Kids interview series. Today, the CEO and founder of From Girls to Women and Digiteens, Tova Garr, is here with me today. Tova's work is dedicated to strengthening the mother-daughter relationship and helping parents get up to speed on what they must know today about raising teens in the digital world. Tova's work focuses on supporting and mentoring teens and helping parents understand and support their kids through the challenges of adolescence. Tova does this through teaching parents and teens to communicate successfully about the important stuff. Tova runs mother-daughter workshops and lectures for parents on all issues teen, especially social media, and runs group coaching programs and provides one-on-one coaching. Tova has spent over 20 years working with teens and young adults around the world in Israel, the US, Australia, South Africa, the former Soviet Union, and more. Tova is committed to making sure every teen is raised in a supportive, nurturing environment, despite the changing times, and that parents have the tools to do so. Hi, Tova. I'm so happy that you're here today with us today. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here.
So can you tell?
Great conversation.
Yeah, I'm really excited. So can you tell our listeners a little bit about like how you got started in this work, your background, and how you started working with parents and teens?
Sure. I mean, the truth is that I've really been doing this pretty much my whole life. My parents worked at a summer camp, so I started at 4. So I was surrounded, both my parents come from an educational background. So I was surrounded in education. I grew up in Israel in the Israeli Scouts. So by the time I was 16, I was already a counselor for 6th graders. And I fell in love with the work. And it's pretty much what I've done my whole professional career in a lot of different ways. Always working with teens and young adults. And for many years, I worked in the nonprofit world in a lot of different positions. And my latest job was the director of the teen department in a central agency in New York. And one of the things that I noticed, other than all those who worked in nonprofit know you do a lot of work that is based on what your funders want, was that I was doing my own personal growth work, right? As I was going through this period, I've been doing it for several years already. And one of the things that became very clear to me, both from the women's groups that I was involved in and working with teens and youth professionals working with teens at the time, was that really the most important part in our life is our teen years. And this is something I've always known, right? This is always true. We make a lot of really important decisions about who we are in this world, how we relate to it, what we think about other people. And then what I was meeting was all these women, incredible women, right? From their 20s to their mid 70s doing personal growth work. And so many times the really critical events in their lives that had brought them to where they were in their teen years. And what's common to all of us is whether we have a good relationship or a bad relationship with our mother, whatever that looks like, right? Wherever it is on the scale, it is one of the most important relationships in our lives. And during our teen years is when we often cannot talk to our mother and have a really hard time. And so I started off on this mission of trying to bridge that gap. I know teens really well. I know how they think. I know how they function. And I wanted to bridge that gap. And that's kind of where I started. And where it led me to, because of the world that we live in, is into the world of social media. And understanding that if you're old enough to have a teen right now, you don't get social media. Even if you are tech savvy, even if you are connected to your computer and your phone, as many parents are, you still don't get it on the level that our teens are dealing with it today and what their world looks like. And so I found myself trying to bridge another huge gap. So that's where we are today. I love and I'm grateful that I can do this now in a way that I believe works. So here I am.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you. And thank you so much for doing the work that you're doing, because it is important. You are somebody who clearly, like, this is like your life purpose. Like you're meant to be here talking to teens and, facilitating these conversations between teens and parents, the mother-daughter relationship. And I feel a lot the same way. Like, I'm here for a reason, to educate women about their bodies, to help prevent unintended pregnancy, the spread of STDs, and within that goal, it's like the mode that I've chosen to, help get that message out there is talking to parents, because mom is always there. She's there from the beginning, and long before I can start having these conversations with the teenagers, she can be having those conversations with the younger children, and preparing, laying the foundation. So yeah, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. I know it's like super important. And why during the teenage years is it so hard to talk to our moms?
Well, one of the things that teens are doing in this stage of life is figuring out who they are and where they belong. That's really their job as teenagers. And part of that is looking at our parents and saying, what do our parents believe? What have they taught us all these years? Which, when they're younger, we kind of take, you take as grant for granted, right? That is the truth. Your parents are kind of like God to you when you're a little kid, because they are the source of all answers. And as they leave that stage of life where their parents really aren't the source of all answers anymore, more so, by the way, now that they have phones, right? And depending on where you are in the world, 8-year-olds sometimes have access to phones, but even not, they have access to iPads and computers today, and can find answers otherwise in other places. One of the things that a teen needs to do in order to become a healthy, functioning adult is to separate from their parents. They have to. And that separation cannot happen unless they push back against everything their parents believe. Now, that doesn't mean that your kid has to become a total rebel. I wasn't a total rebel when I was a teen. I was, in fact, too good when I was a teen, but that's a topic for another conversation. But nevertheless, your teen is going to be questioning what you believe, everything you say, right? That's why parents find it particularly annoying when their kids point out every way in their life where they are not in alignment, right? When they are not doing what they say, your teen is more than happy to point that out and show you. But that is not because they're trying to be particularly annoying and frustrating. It's because they themselves are at the stage where they're questioning what you're saying. And so they're looking and listening to everything you do and everything you say, so they can say, wait a second, do I really believe in this? Is this really true for me? Right? And the answer may be yes. Right? Often when I talk to parents and they're like, well, but if I talk, and I'm sure you find this in your work as well, right? But if I share with them or I talk to them about sex, they're going to go have sex tomorrow. Well, no, not really. That's not how it works. Right? And no, if they learn that there are other ways of thinking other than yours, that doesn't mean that they're going to believe it. They grew up in your house. They grew up with your values, right? What you did for the last 10, 12, 16 years matters, and it matters a lot. But they need to ask themselves, do I actually believe in that? And the teen years are the time to do it, and they're the time to do it in a safe way, where they can, when a mother comes to me and she says, my daughter seems to be so happy outside, but she's so angry when she's at home. And I say to her, first of all, you should actually feel honored, because it means that the anger that she's feeling, she feels safe to express around you. Now, we can talk about how to, work with that and help her not feel like she needs to express her anger all the time, or in the way that she's doing that may be inappropriate or destructive. But it means that she feels safe enough to do it, because if she didn't, she wouldn't be doing it. But that's
Right.
the time. That's the time to do it. And you want your kid to be rebelling in one way or another. In fact, if you find that your daughter is really good and like all the time, like just super nice and sweet and not rebelling in any kind of way and just saying yes to everything, that you should actually be concerned.
Yeah. Yeah. Because that's kind of the people pleaser, and that type of thing, which is definitely a pattern that women in particular, not exclusively, but in particular, do fall into. So.
Yeah, they fall into it. If I'm looking at my own story, right, I was trying very hard to be perfect when I was a teen. And so I was working so hard at being in control that part of it was being good and nice to everybody. There's nothing wrong with being good and nice. I'm still good and nice in my 40s. But, you want to pay attention, because there's something going on there. If you're never seeing them angry, you're frustrated, or, having a hard time.
Yeah, and it's important to let our kids fail too, and that kind of like that whole perfection thing, it's like there's a piece, where the kids are putting a lot of pressure on themselves, and it's important to let kids, fall down and, fail and, all these different things. It's part of their growing and learning within that safe container that you're providing for them. And, if they don't learn these skills, like if they're not pushing back against the parent during the teenage years, and that happens when they're out in their 20s and in the workforce, they're going to get fired. Their boss isn't going to put up with that. So it's like, I can definitely, see where having that important, safe space within the family unit to express and explore, I think is super, super.
You bring up an important point because failure is critical. Not only is it important, it's critical in today's world. And we've created a world for with good intention where kids are not failing enough. They're
Mhm.
not failing enough. They go, they play sports, everybody's a winner.
Right.
Everybody gets a medal, right? Everybody's worried about having them experience failure. One of the things that I see in my own practice is girls who are 14 and 15 and 16 and 17 who are failing for the first time because
Mhm.
suddenly school is really, really hard, right? Or the expectations that they have put on themselves and that their surroundings have put on themselves have brought them to a place where they cannot fulfill them anymore. And because they have no experience in failing, they completely crumble and fall apart and don't
Right.
know what to do. And so you want to be teaching your kids to fail from a very young age. Failing is good. Failing is part of it, right? I saw a great meme the other day about successful people versus people who don't succeed, right? And it was great because what it showed was the person who fails has failures and blocks over their head weighing them down, right? The person who's successful has failure as steps that they step on to move themselves forward. And that's what we want to be teaching our teens is that failure is part of life. In fact, you're going to fail a lot more than you're going to succeed in life.
Yeah. Well, the road to success is paved by the bricks of failure, is one saying. And, another thing is too, kids who are afraid to fail often won't try. And
Correct.
so they'll let, opportunities pass them by because they're not sure they can do it. They don't want to look bad, they don't know how to do it. So they're not willing to take the risk and risk looking bad or less than perfect while they try and figure this stuff out.
Exactly.
hmm So what can we do to help our kids and parents, have good communication during the teenage years?
The first thing I would say, and probably the most important, is that you want to look at how you are currently communicating with your teen, and the balance you want to have is 20% of you talking and 80% listening. And if you are not 20% and 80%, then something needs to change. The complaint that I hear the most from teens and have heard for the last 20 something years since I've worked with teens is that their parents do not listen to them. And it's true. And don't get me wrong, I know that it's hard as a parent. You've got a lot of things going on, you're working, you've got usually more than one kid in the house, many things to juggle, after school activities, school, getting everybody doing what they needed to do, fed, in good health. And I get that. And still, you want to take the time to listen because if you're not listening, what they learn is actually to not talk to you.
hmm
Right? So
And
they're,
then
yeah.
yeah, then you end up in this situation where, you've got the teenager who says, speaks in single word answers and grunts.
Correct. And the
Yeah.
reality is that even if you have good communication, many teens, boys often more than girls, will speak in one word syllables. And that's fine, at certain times, but you want them to be able to talk to you in the important times. And
Yeah.
that's where it becomes more tricky is when they don't feel that they can talk to you when things are bad or when things, have the potential of getting bad, then you're really in trouble. And they
Mhm.
won't if they feel like you're either going to be mad at them, you're going to judge them, you're not going to listen. And just notice, just right now, think about the last day. Okay, the last 24 hours of the way you communicated with your team. How much of the time were you listening to them and how much of the time were you ordering around, telling them what to do, telling them what they did wrong or what you expect of them or why they didn't? Just evaluate yourself and say, how can I shift that scale just a little bit and see what happens?
Mhm. And I noticed too, a lot of times when, I mean, we all think our brains go, a million miles a minute. And, a friend of mine recently had a situation where, he was making assumptions about like what happened, what was going on with his daughter and this kind of stuff. And so like he was working himself up into this state before his daughter even came home. And I was like, one of these times where you want to like give advice or say something, like to kind of bring it down a notch. And I was just like, well, just try being curious, kind of thing. And of course, he wasn't in the space to hear those words or whatever. But, it's like, it's funny how like we just make assumptions based on like no information, just stories that we're making up in our head. And we don't, take the time or have the curiosity to ask our children, like, so what happened, like, tell me more, it's like, these kinds of things. And so when she got home, she's walking into this whole state he's worked himself into, whereas, like the story that she's going to tell might be completely opposite of what he was working up in his head. So
I can't tell you how many times I get parents who are all worked up over absolutely nothing,
mhm.
because they have a sliver of information,
Yeah.
or even just the beginning of a story, but they don't give their kids an opportunity to finish it. And what you're doing when you do this is you're cutting off communication. You're cutting off future conversations.
Right.
I always say to parents, take a moment, even if your child has started a story and you are getting really anxious because you already think you know how it's ended. Excuse yourself and say, I have to go to the bathroom. I'll be right back. Go to the bathroom, take 10 breaths, calm yourself down, and come back to the conversation. Use whatever excuse you need to. I don't care. Say oh my God, I have to go change the laundry. I'll be right back. I really want to listen to you. I want to hear the end of the story, but give me 1 second. I'll be right back. There's no lack of excuses of how to get out of a conversation for a couple of minutes just to calm yourself down. If you don't give yourself the opportunity to let them tell their story in their words as they see it, you are most likely going to be telling the wrong story. First of all, because you weren't there. You
Yep.
have actually don't know what happened. Second of all, you're doing what, by the way, we naturally do and we do all the time in our life is we have a piece of information and we make up the rest of the story. It's how we live the majority of our lives.
Mhm.
But when we do that with our teenagers, we're really doing them an injustice because we think, first of all, if you're an adult today, really you don't know what it's like to grow up in today's world. There are many things that are the same and are going to be exactly the same, like teens needing to figure out who they are and how they fit into this world, social dynamics. There are many things that are the same, but there are many, many things that are different.
Mhm.
And we cannot make assumptions because the reality is we don't know.
That's
We
true.
really don't know. And what we don't know even more so is that I could have been in the same situation when I was a teen, right, as the teen that I'm talking to, but I'm not her.
Yep.
And her circle of friends, her school, her world that she's living in, there's no way that it can be my story because it's
Yep.
not the same story, right? And it's a good 20 plus years apart. So I have to listen to her and again completely if I want to be helpful and want to be present, which is I know what most parents want, right? At the
Right.
end of the day, we want to help our kids, right? And you may find out 8 times out of 10, not all the time, but you may find out 8 times out of 10 that actually what you came into thinking was a big deal is actually not a big deal at all. I had a mother once who came and she was all upset. She was ready. She was reflecting to me on a conversation she had had after we had done the session. And she said, I was all upset. And, she was starting to tell me about these social dynamics and it had to do with a fight that was going on and some pictures that were passed around. And she said, had I not listened to her, I would have thought she was the one involved, right? But I tried to listen to you and I took a minute, and it turns out all this had to do with somebody completely different. She was just telling the story, and the way she was telling it sounded at the beginning like she was the one who got in trouble, but actually it wasn't her at all. She was just so upset about this thing that happened to her friend that she needed to share with me. right? Had she not stopped, can you imagine this kid who was just trying to tell her mother about something that happened that she herself was shocked about? Had her mother turned around and blamed her for something she didn't even do, that would have been the end of it.
Yep. And she would never come with a
Anything.
situation like that in the future. Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's so true. And and you mentioned, like how our brains make up information, like when I'm working with my clients and stuff, a lot of times we'll have a similar conversation about like kids and sex and this kind of thing, especially like small children. It's like, they get little slivers of information, and we all have creative minds, and where things don't make sense or we're missing information, our brain just will like fill in these details, and they may or may not be true. And so when hearing you talk about, as adults, we do this too. It's like it's just part of human nature. And so really taking that moment just to like take that deep breath and slow down and be curious and listen and let your child do the talking versus you jumping in and interrupting and putting whatever thoughts you made up on the situation onto it. you know it's a skill. It really is. It's a skill to let us stop and take that breath and be curious.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mm.
Yep.
So I also you said something earlier in the beginning too that I kind of wanted to touch on also. When you were talking about how teenagers, their job is to, figure out who they are. And in the like I've heard before, like there's like these 12-year blocks of time. So like the ages, from birth to age 12, from 12 to 24, and then beyond, like in that block of, in the first span of your lifetime, those first two blocks of 12 years, in particular, like the 12 to 24 range, like kids are going through so many changes. Like this period of time is like so important, like you were saying, in their lives. Like they go from kids to figuring out who they are, and the decisions and choices that they make during this time period can really have an impact on the long-term outlook of their life. Like a lot of events that happened to me during that time period of my life shaped who I am and the things that I teach about currently. And that may be true for you as well. A lot of us who come into these types of professions are, shaped by our experiences in the early years and stuff. So I thought that was really important point to make. And so I just kind of wanted to circle back around to that, because it truly is such a pivotal time in, a young person's life. Would you agree?
Oh, 100%. I mean, one of another great expert, I don't know if you have run the summit, called Deborah Beck, has this great book she called, which is something like my feet are ugly. I don't remember the exact name of the title, but I remember when I first spoke to her several years ago, and what she was saying, no, basically a boy when she was a teenager told her she had ugly feet, and she walked around for years believing that she had really ugly feet, and she refused to wear sandals or flip-flops, and like she would only wear closed-toed shoes until at some point, like in her 20s, she met somebody who just said something about how nice her feet were, and she was like, my feet, right? Right, this one sentence that a boy said to her when she was a teenager impacted at least 10 years of her life and her belief on herself. So think about, if such a small sentence and something so insignificant can make a difference, how, in the teen years, and we all remember our teen years, right? We get picked on for pretty much anything and everything,
Yeah.
right? Part of what happens in that social dynamic at that age, how hurtful that is. And the more sensitive your child is, boy or girl, the more they're going to internalize the messages they're getting from the outside. If you have not helped build that resilience in them, or help walk them through that process and asking themselves the question of, is that really true? Right? Is it possible that something that somebody has said to me is coming from their own hurt or their own frustration, or something that really has nothing to do with you at
Yeah,
all? Most of the time, those comments have nothing to do with you.
it's really true. Yeah. And, and asking that question, is it really true? I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Byron Katie, but, she asks questions like that, like, is it true? And then invites people to turn that statement around, like find other ways that it can apply, like, you have ugly feet. Oh, I have ugly feet. It's like turning that around. It's like, well, a lot of times we project onto other people, what we're believing and that kind of stuff. So encouraging kids to, ask those questions, is that true? Are they projecting on me, type thing can, I think, really help to, build that resiliency and prevent the internalization of those kinds of messages.
Yeah, I often ask, my teens, not only is it true, but is it bad actually? Right? I had a situation with one of my clients where her boyfriend was complaining that she's too sensitive. And so I just asked her, I said, you actually, from my experience, you are a pretty sensitive person, but is that a bad thing? Right? What are the great things that come from you being sensitive?
Right.
And helping them take something, which again, it may be true, right? He is right. She is very sensitive and very intuitive. And so to him, that can be really annoying sometimes, but actually it's one of her superpowers. And so
Right.
helping her reframe that, gave it a different twist. So the next time he says something, she's like, well, that's who I am, right?
Exactly.
So
Hmm.
I am. It's part of what makes me such an amazing girlfriend. And
That's
then, which is what she said to him. And then he was like, oh, okay. Right?
it.
So just helping them reframe it and change it, I think is part of what makes the impact. Uh,
Hmm.
and bringing it full circle and realizing, you know, as I say, what are their superpowers? Which
Hmm.
to them
And
often at first seem like their weaknesses.
yeah, I love, that reframe of, like, oh, well, this is a bad thing about you. I was like, no, actually, this is a really cool and awesome thing about me. And it's one of my superpowers. I think that's awesome. Great way to look at it. So you were mentioning too, how kids will pick on each other, bully, that kind of stuff. Can we talk a little bit about that and, like when it crosses the line into bullying and inappropriate behavior, like, can we talk also about that and like what parents can do to kind of bring things back to center?
Well, I think that the first thing that parents today need to realize is that not everything is bullying. I think we've kind of, because we've raised so much awareness around bullying, I think it's gotten to a point where many parents will describe behaviors that are normative, teens picking on each other, kids picking on each other, as bullying.
Hmm.
And they're not the same thing. Just because somebody called your kid a name, even if it was a really bad name, or, pulled their hair, or, even took a book and threw it down, that's not bullying. That can just be mean. Kids are mean, right?
Hmm.
Especially girls around 12, 13, 14 can be really, really mean for a lot of different reasons. But still, that's not bullying. Bullying is something that is consistent, it is long term, it is something that has a widespread effect, right? And something that is persistent. Um, and so we want to, first of all, make sure that we're calling what we see as it is, right?
Okay.
Part of building resilience is actually going through difficult situations, is having a situation where somebody does something to me that is hurtful and being able to stand up for myself.
Hmm.
And that is really important, really important. I actually worked with a couple of teens, a boy and a girl, who were being bullied long term, had been bullying. By the time they arrived at me, they'd been bullied already, I would say, for 2 or 3 years
Hmm.
in their school by peers and actually by a teacher as well.
Hmm.
And part of the work that I needed to do with them is, first of all, realize their strengths, because they had been beaten down in very different ways. They may have been twins, but they were very different.
Sure.
Um, and helping them realize where their strengths are, who they really are, find their power, right? Doing a lot of exercises, even just body exercises that allow you to stand in your body with confidence, right? And seeing your own power was very difficult for them. And
Hmm.
working on that process, and that's something as parents you can easily do. Help them, first of all, make sure that they have places in their lives, if they are being bullied, where they are thriving and successful. Because many times what happens is that kids, when they're being bullied, is they disconnect from other areas of their lives and kind of withdraw inward, because they develop a belief about the world that the world is out to get them, right?
Right.
It doesn't matter where they go. And
Yep.
so the first step is finding the places in which they have an opportunity to excel and succeed and get support, right? Depending on where the bullying is happening, right? Let's assume that at school,
Right.
making sure that there are after school activities where they can really shine.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing that allows them to see is that this isn't true everywhere. So this isn't who I am.
Right.
And then I believe that in bullying situations, parents need to take an active role. I think we should not rely on educational institutions to do the work for us. I think they, in most cases, mean well. Can't say that about the school of these kids, but in most cases, they mean well. But often they are not equipped, or they're just simply making bad or poor choices. And you shouldn't stand up for that as a parent.
Right.
Even if it comes to what we did with these two kids, is we helped transition them to a different school,
Mm-hmm.
where they were very active participants in picking the new school and finding the right place for them.
Mm-hmm.
But you want to do as much as you can to empower them, because one of the things that happens to us when we're bullied is we lose our power, and we
Right.
believe that we are powerless. So finding as many places and ways in which they can feel powerful and safe and protected is key. And in extreme cases, yeah, you got to remove them from the situation, because sometimes there's nothing to do.
Right. Yeah. Especially if the school's not being helpful and that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about social media and stuff too, because I know that sometimes, these bullying, hazing, things can spill over into social media. So can we just kind of start with like kind of an overview of what is going on in social media and with kids these days? Like our age group, like we know about Facebook and Twitter. It's like we don't know about a lot of these other things. And I know that there's all kinds of different, social media platforms out there. So what are kids using? Can you tell us a little bit about like what's going on with teens and
Sure.
social
I
media?
mean, I teach a 5-week course on this because there's so much to cover, and even in the 5-week course, I can tell you, I feel like I touch the fingertip of what's really going on, but I will try
Mm.
to give a short understanding. So the first thing I think the parents need to know is that the world that our kids live in, as soon as they have phones and are connected online, and I want you to remember that as soon as your child has a device that is Wi-Fi enabled, it is if they have a phone. So I often hear parents, well, my kid has a phone, but they don't have a SIM card. It doesn't matter. That's the same thing as if they have a full phone. It just means they don't have 100% access to it all the time, but it's still the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And if when we were in school, if I fought with my friends, once I got home, I didn't have to talk to them, right? Unless we connected over the phone or chose to meet after school, I didn't have to see them until the next day.
Right.
Today with phones, if you're struggling, if you're having a hard time, it goes with you all the time. So you don't want to have your kids, I mean, I don't want to get into rules and regulations because we'll be here forever, but you don't want your kids having their phone at night. In fact, you don't want them having it at least 2 hours before they go to sleep. But regardless of whether you still do that, it's with them everywhere. The fights, the disagreements, they go with them online. So our kids are, depending on what country you're in, are communicating on different kinds of platforms. Snapchat is one of the most popular, partially because it goes away, and partially because it's fun. There are a lot of
Mm-hmm.
fun things that you can do on Snapchat. There's a new feature on Snapchat called Maps, which actually allows you to see where your friends are. My recommendation to everybody that I meet and talk to is to disable that capability. But that's
Wow.
another story. Nonetheless, kids are using it and are loving it. Facebook is for old people. Sorry to let you all know. They are more likely to be on Instagram
Mm-hmm.
and hang out there. And then there are a whole list, and I teach about this in my course, of apps that you don't want your kids to have. There are all kinds of apps that allow, which mostly boys are using, but allow kids to hide pictures and videos.
Mm.
Boys today are collecting girls they know, not just girls in general, girls they know's naked pictures on their phone and storing them like baseball cards and exchanging them like baseball cards. Um, and so there are apps. One of them is called Calculator. It actually looks like a calculator. It is not a calculator. Behind it is the capability of storing videos and pictures. There are multiple apps like After School or other ones which have unique school forms where you can either post something in your own name and badmouth somebody, or you can do it anonymously. A lot of them are anonymous. There are various things that have come out which are masked as, allowing yourself to give feedback, like Sahara that was out last summer, and I don't honestly, I haven't checked recently if it's still out there or not. Which was masked as, oh, you can give feedback to people and help them, but really have become forms of bullying. And
Right.
what's happening is that our kids are being inundated with information, and it goes with them nonstop. And so there's fear. First of all, there's fear of missing out. If I'm not there, if I'm not part of the conversation, if I'm not answering my text message right away, then maybe they will turn on me. Okay,
Yeah.
I'll become the topic of conversation. So I call that another do FOMO, right? Fear of missing out becomes really, really heightened. Part of what we see is the fact that phones by design, okay, by design are designed to release dopamine with use. And so apps are designed that way. The phone itself is designed that way. And so that's why, when you see your kids addicted to games, it's because the game is built to release small moments of pleasure that release dopamine in our brain and cause addiction, which is 100% similar to addiction to cigarettes, to cocaine, various drugs, to alcohol, same addiction.
Yeah, I was just thinking as you were talking about that, how they're engineering the apps and the phone to elicit those chemicals. It sounds a lot like what the cigarette companies were doing when they were marketing to kids, and like the chemicals and the additives that they're putting in the cigarettes and stuff. So, and then, many years later, we found out all these nefarious practices that, the cigarette companies are doing. And we kind of know already that the cell phone companies are doing that too, the app companies and stuff. And
100%, and they are messing with our brains. And there's enough research now to show that it is literally changing our brain. And I just actually finished I did several sessions this summer with teens themselves, for those who don't have a phone yet, for 13 to 15-year-olds, and then 16 to 18-year-olds, kind of looking at their online profile, thinking about the future. And one of the things that I showed all three groups was a video that really talks about how it's changing your brain, right? And what it is actually doing to you, because it's important that they know. It's
right,
important that they become aware of that, and then can make a choice whether this is something they want to be a part of or not. And
right,
how they're going to regulate themselves and become aware that, and I say to the teens before they get before they get their phone, I say to them, it sounds ridiculous right now, but you're not going to want to put it down. And you need to know that's not your fault, but you can make a choice whether that becomes your reality or not.
yeah,
Right? It's hard to fight. It is hard to fight. Don't get me wrong. We're fighting giants, right? Who
right,
have lots of money, and have designed this to make it very difficult for us to disconnect. But we need to make a conscious choice to do that. When we have two times in our lives when our brain bursts into a growth spurt. One is when we're babies, and another one is when we're teens.
yeah,
And during that time, what you use is going to grow, and what you doesn't, you're going to lose.
right,
And during these teen years, your kids are developing some of the most important skills that they need. They're learning to communicate with one another. They're learning how, again, to figure out who they are, reading, all these important skills. And one of the things we see teens are losing, and again, they're losing it, and they're not going to gain it later on,
right.
is how to communicate. Right? When I talk to a mother and she's telling me about her 11-year-old daughter who was invited to a birthday party, and they went to a restaurant, and everybody except for this girl was on their phone, including the birthday girl.
Oh,
Nobody spoke to each other, right? Or this 14-year-old girl, one of the sweetest girls I've ever met in Portland. I just met her this summer when I was doing a workshop there. And she was telling me that You know, she goes to school and the friend to her right and the friend to her left both have a phone. She does not take her phone to school. And she doesn't really know what to do. And I said, well, what if you had a conversation with them about it? She said, well, the truth is even if they put their phones down, I don't know what we would talk about. Now,
Mhm.
can you imagine yourself when you were 14 saying something like that? I can't.
Yeah,
We always had what to talk about. There was always what to talk about.
sure. Yeah.
So, right, whether it was important things or it was ridiculous, stupid things,
Yeah.
they
Uh-huh.
always had what to talk about. And they're losing their ability to communicate with one another. They sit with each other with the phone and they don't know what to do.
Right. Yeah.
And
It's
we
so
need to do
interesting.
something about it.
Hmm. And those are really important social skills too, because and I'm thinking about like all of like, let's just take dating for example. I date. I'm not in a long-term partnership, and so there's like all of these men out there who are really, and women too, but men who are lacking like these social skills, like they don't know how to have a conversation. It's like, whether it's they just talk at you, like there's no give and take. It's like, so there's like these skills that are not being learned. And I remember as a teenager, like we were always talking and laughing and giggling, and like half of the stuff we didn't even make sense, and if adults were listening to us, it was like we were speaking gibberish. It's like, so yeah, it's kind of sad that social media, that our phones type thing are making it so that we're kind of losing that ability to communicate, and it's only going to get harder as they get older.
It's going to get harder as they get older, but it's also extremely hard right now. And one of the things that I see is, if you already mentioned boys and girls, right? When we were kids, if a boy liked you, it took a lot of courage to come over and say something. Now
Hmm.
they send a text message, right?
Hmm.
And that's already one thing to send a text message. It's another thing when, and this, by the way, I work with girls all over the world. Okay, so I've heard the story multiple times because I know a lot of people when I tell this story are like, oh, this doesn't happen in my community. Trust me, everybody says this. It's not, oh
Right.
no, no, my kid's a good kid. This doesn't happen where they are. Um, Girls who've been propositioned, right? One of my clients, 14 years old, gets a text message, would you like to come to the bathroom to measure my penis size? Right, this is a boy she's known since kindergarten. Now, she said no. What did he do? He sent the same text message to her girlfriend sitting right next to her, right? Who said no. So I'm sure that kept going, and she was sure it kept going until eventually somebody says yes,
Right.
right? Or she's sitting in history class. And again, a boy she's known since kindergarten is sending her a text message and asking if she wants him to finger her. Now, I didn't know what fingering was when I was her age, that's for sure. But
Right.
also, the boys, not only boys, by the way, girls as well, okay, have a courage to say things that they would never say in person. That's number one. Number
Right.
two, because they're exposed to porn at a much younger age, they feel that there's this expectation that this is what they do because
Right.
nobody's talking to them. Nobody's teaching them what is appropriate or inappropriate. Nobody's they really, there's no real conversation.
Yes.
They are developing this image and idea in their mind that this is what girls want and that
Right.
this is pleasant for girls. I mean, I can tell you again, as a 43-year-old woman, I have seen more pictures of penises of men that I don't know than I ever cared to in my life.
Yeah. Right.
And
Hmm.
it never ceases to amaze me that a man that I have never met who is trying to get me to go on a date with him, regardless of him knowing my situation and status and I am available, thinks that that is a good idea.
Yeah, I know. That's
And it just beyond amazes me.
I know. It's so true. And I'm glad that you brought up the whole porn thing, because it's definitely an important conversation that we need to be having. And the point that you're making, like kids are going to the phones, like if you can't talk to your parents and get this information from your parents, you're going to go to your phone, right? And so when you type sex into the search engine, you get an eye full of, oh my God,
No,
and it's not, yeah, I mean, it's not good sex education, it's not education at all. And so, one of the things that, I help with the, parents talking to their kids about this stuff. But I would just love to see like more resources available for kids who are curious, because kids are curious. And if, and they're going to hear about sex. And this is going back to the whole part where you were talking about, like that whole belief, if you tell kids about sex, they'll go out and do it. Well, no, that's not what's going to happen. But if you don't talk about sex, they're going to go to the internet and Google sex and learn about it there. Like I've had, people tell me about what happens when their kid, wants to learn how to kiss, and they go to the internet and learn, look for information there. And it's kind of horrifying, the things that they find. And so I really think, having those conversations, with your kids about these topics, and then also, talking to your kid about like, what are they going to find if they Google sex, type thing. It's like, this is not what people want, this is entertainment,
And look,
entertainment.
it's important to say, to be honest about what's out there. And, I actually I had a colleague who called me a little over a year ago. She was like, I wasn't ready for this. I was ready in 3 years. I wasn't ready now. And I'm like, what happened? She's like, well, my 9-year-old came home. She wouldn't talk to me for 48 hours. Now, this is a home where they're open and honest. They talk about a lot of things. And so when her daughter finally opened up, she found out that she had gone to her best friend's home and her best friend showed her porn. Now,
Mm,
I want also, for those of you who don't watch porn regularly, porn today is not Playboy. Porn today is a lot of kinky things.
yeah,
It is animals, they use all kinds of unpleasant things, not traditional sex that you would expect to see, um, or at least most adults that I meet would expect to see.
right.
And so she called, this is her best friend. She called the mother of the girl, and said, I just wanted you to know that this happened. And what did the mother say? She said, I think it's my fault. I said, why is it your fault? She said, well, my daughter had some questions and I answered them, but I knew that I didn't really answer all her questions. I could tell that she had more, but I was feeling uncomfortable, so I kind of stopped the conversation. And so what did her daughter do? As you said, she went to Google and she typed in sex. And what do you do when you're 9 and you find something that you have an idea is wrong? You don't tell your mother, you tell your best friend, right? And you invite her over to see it. And that's how that whole scenario happened. When people say to me, well, how are 9-year-olds finding porn? Well, that's one of the ways, right? That's one of the ways that it happens, is curiosity. And when you actually are the source of information, first of all, you're controlling the information that they get, and you're making sure that they get accurate information, number one. And you need to be aware that it's going to happen whether you like it or not. Okay, it is this day and age, it is not a question of will my child see porn? Your child will see porn. I guarantee it.
Yep.
I guarantee it. It's only a question of when, and are they going to be ready?
Right.
Right? So to a 7-year-old or a 9-year-old, you say, this might happen. You might run into a video of naked people. If you do, just come talk to me. I'll tell you about it then, right? If you make it as something that is not a big deal, something that it's clear that you're not going to get mad about, they'll tell you, because
Right.
they don't want you to get mad. They don't, they have an instinct when they see something that they know they shouldn't be seeing. And
Yes.
so if you kind of make it okay that they can come talk to you about it, they will come talk to you about it.
Yep.
If not, or you find out and you respond in a very angry way, then that is the end again of conversation around that topic.
Yep.
And you want to be their source of information. You
Absolutely.
or somebody like the two of us who you're talking to,
Yep.
who can have those conversations with them. Because if you don't feel that that's something that you're comfortable doing, then let us help you learn how to have that conversation,
Absolutely.
because you have to have it, because the implications that we're seeing are tremendous, and we don't have enough time today to talk about them, but there the implications on relationships, on sexuality, on so many things are tremendous, and us burying our head in the sand and pretending this isn't happening is not serving our kids.
Yeah, and I feel like, I mean, that this is really serious stuff. I mean, it impacts their ability to have healthy relationships in the future.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
100%. And the sad thing to me is they don't even know that it's wrong. They have no idea. I was in one of the Facebook forums that I belong to. A woman posted a question and she said, "My 12-year-old wants sex toys. Should I give it to him?" Now she got all kinds of responses from women, from horrified to of course to all kinds. And I say the first question you want to ask is, why is your 12-year-old asking for sex toys? Where did the idea come from?
Yeah.
Right? It came from somewhere.
Yeah.
The idea that he needs to have sex toys in his life. That's the conversation you want to be having versus the question, should I buy him sex toys or not? Let's
Right.
see what's going on with my child. But 20 years ago, you would have never had that question, would have never come up.
Yeah.
Because a
It's
12-year-old would have not asked for sex toys because a 12-year-old would have not known what a sex toy was.
yeah. Yeah. Even if they got a hold of, the Playboy, tucked in the corner of the house somewhere, it's like they wouldn't have, had exposure to that. And it's really true, the pornography that is available these days is way more X-rated than it ever was, and violent, and so if we're not there to be the counterbalance to what kids are seeing, then we have a lot of boys in particular are looking at the porn. Girls see it too, of course, but boys are more likely to see it at a younger age in general, I think. And that kind of plants the seed that that this is what girls want or expect, that feels good. And of course, those of us who know better, nothing could be further from the truth. And so now you have all these young people who have this different view of sexuality, that they've been exposed to, and they don't know, necessarily that that's not what people are looking for, or considered quote unquote normal, sexuality or whatnot. So, which is not to say that people's kinkiness is abnormal or anything like that, but
No,
you know,
there's a difference between exploring your own sexuality and figuring out what is right for you
yep,
as an adult versus exposing a young teenager who's still developing and even exploring their own body and their own self to those kinds of materials. Because what they're doing is they're saying, oh, this is what I need to be like.
right,
This is this is what it's supposed to be like. So if I'm not like that, like this, I'm not okay. Right?
right,
Forgetting the other issues, there are millions that we could talk about. Just the issue of body image,
mm-hmm.
right? 98% of the population don't look like porn stars.
Yeah, that's really true.
And so we're seeing, right, again, looking at research, boys who are developing erectile dysfunction because they feel inadequate,
Right, because they
right?
don't
Because
measure up to the porn
they don't
star
measure
penis
up to a
size. Yeah,
porn size penis, which is not a normative. I mean, not that there is such a thing really as a normative penis, but that's a different story. It's they can't measure up to it, right? And girls who are saying, "But that's not what I look like." Of
right,
course you don't, right? And so it's just on that basic level, which we have enough trouble with body image, right? We had enough trouble with body image before the age of social media. So now in the age of social media, where everybody is using filters to make themselves look like what they don't and what they
yeah,
think it should look like,
yeah.
right? It just makes it so much more difficult.
Mm-hmm. And that brings up another important point too. The like the Snapchat filters and this kind of stuff. Like there's a lot of like plastic surgeons are seeing a lot of like teenagers coming through wanting to like look like their Snapchat filters, and they were saying that part of that is like it's like mirroring our faces, like one sided or the other, because like we're not symmetrical necessarily, and so like so it's like it they're showing us pictures that aren't even of ourselves. It's like it's not really us, and then it's like, so this whole body dysmorphia kind of thing. So
Yeah, exactly. It's a huge problem because even though they know that it's not true, right? It still makes them feel bad about themselves,
right,
right? You don't look like that because it's not real. It's not real for anybody, right? And that is really hard when you're a teenager and you have zits, because that's part of what it means, right? When you've got hormonal changes. And you use these filters and you look zitless, and then somebody meets you in person and they're like, right? How many times have you seen a profile on Facebook? You meet the person and that you meet that person in real life, and you're like,
That's not a match.
yeah. I mean, so many times that's happened to me, where
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm not what? Okay, nice to meet you. You look absolutely nothing like your profile picture, right?
Mhm.
And it's kind of absurd, but for us as adults, we're like, oh, okay. As kids, what it's doing to them and doing to their sense of self is really harmful.
Right. So what can parents do to help protect their kids against all these things that social media brings into the room?
The first thing that they need to do is they need to learn. They need to learn. We need to, as adults, we need to catch up to the world, which is ever changing, and it is changing very quickly, that our teens are living in. We need to dig our head out of the sand and take a look and learn what the differences are, learn what kind of world that they're dealing with, learn how to communicate with them so we can talk to them about it, make sure that they are being educated themselves so they can make better choices. Right?
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I have found with cell phones is that because we don't know, we just give it to them and say good luck, right? Which the analogy I like to use is it's like driving a car. Would you ever give your teenager the keys to a car when they have not learned how to drive yet and say, good luck, I hope you figure it out? Right? Not in a million years. A phone is
Exactly.
so much more complicated than driving a car.
Yeah.
And we do it all the time. So make sure that they are educated. Make sure that they are learning about this device. Make sure that they see this device as it is, which is a loan from you, which they need to learn how to use responsibly. And if they
Yeah.
can't, well, then they can't use it. Don't use their phones as weapons, right? I see it all the time. And parents are like, but it works. Yes, it works because their phone is really important to them, but it's not actually helping. They're not learning anything. If you take your kid's phone away because they didn't clean their room or because they were late from curfew, then they have learned absolutely nothing other than to lie to you next time so you don't take away their phone because that's more important. And B, they learn nothing about the actual issue that they had. So just be aware of that. Even if it in the moment makes them do what you want them to do. So educate yourself, make sure your kids are educated, and make sure that they're educated not just from you, but from outside sources. And why is that? Because your teens only listen to you to a certain extent. It's just, again, because of the stage of life that they are in, they will only listen to you to a certain extent. When they start hearing it from another source, whether, again, it's true for their teachers as well, because their teachers are also somebody that they kind of like half listen to, half don't listen to because they're their teachers. The
Yes.
more they hear it from outside sources, the more they will actually take it seriously. And so make sure that they're hearing the same messages from people that you trust, who can share that information with them. And keep your finger on the pulse. Just keep your finger on their pulse. Pay attention to your children. Pay attention to what they're doing, what they're involved in. Put those apps on your phone, play around with them, go into the video games, learn what they're like. Make sure that when you say to your teen, your apps and your video games should be on the highest security setting, you actually know what that means.
Mm.
You're not just saying it because I told you to say it.
Right.
But you actually know what that means. You know what that looks like to go into their phone or into the video game and set it up so you can also check on it, because
Mm-hmm.
you know what the real implications are, right? I spoke to a girl the other day and she was telling me that she's been on this video game since she was 11, and she's been communicating with this woman who's now 22, right? And now they became friends on Instagram, but she feels really safe because they've known each other for a long time. And what do I think that she should do? Can she still talk to her? And I said to her, I'm going to be really honest with you. I don't know a lot of 22-year-olds who would be in touch with an 11-year-old.
Right.
He said, but if you feel like there's a chance that this is somebody real and you want to explore it, then what I suggest is that you set up a time to talk to her on video with an adult, with somebody that you trust who can see that this is a real person.
Mm-hmm.
because you don't know who's on the other end of that line.
Right.
She's been communicating with her for 2 years already.
Yeah.
And she feels safe because it was on this really friendly, site.
Sure.
And we need to be aware that this is what's going on for our kids. The places that they're not being fulfilled in their real life is where they're going to look for support and help online. They feel unheard in their real life, which is true for most teens. They're going to find companionship and listening ear online.
Right.
And that's where they get into trouble. So
Yeah.
you really have to keep your eye on your teen, being aware of what's going on with them. The statement of their teens it's going to pass doesn't work anymore. It's not true anymore. They'll figure it out on their own, right? Generations have said that. They'll figure it out on their own. That is not true for technology. It's just not true. They're not going to figure it out. So sorry. Sorry.
Some
The good news is
there,
that there
yes.
are people out there to help you. That's the good news.
Yes,
There
definitely.
are many other people out there to help you through this journey and figure it out. And hopefully also our big corporations will start taking some social responsibility and creating bigger, wider forums to make that happen.
Yes, we can hold out hope for that.
Yeah.
So can you tell, well, before we wrap it up, is there anything else that you can think of that we haven't covered that you would like to contribute to the conversation? Any final thoughts for our listeners?
Yes. I mean, there are many things I'd like you to know, but the most important for right now is that no matter where you are on your journey right now, and no matter how old your daughter or your son is and where they are, it's not too late. It is never too late to have good communication with your teen. It is never too late to talk about these important topics. It is never too late to set boundaries around social media. It is never too late. Will it be harder if your child is now 15 or 16? Yeah, it will. But it's not too late, so don't give up on them. Remember that even if things are hard right now, you are the most important person in their life. Even if they shove you away, even if they pretend that they hate you and don't want to talk to you, they really truly care about what you think and what you say and what you do. So just know that that's true, even if it doesn't really feel that way.
Yeah, and I think deep down, most kids do want to please their parents, and
100%.
do the right thing.
Yep. Yes.
Cool. So can you tell our listeners a little bit about your free gift?
Sure. So because there is so much for you to learn and to know, what I've created is a free 7-day challenge, a social media challenge. And the goal of the social media challenge is to give you a glimpse into this world of what I believe every parent needs to know today. I did my best not to overwhelm you. Trust me, it was hard. But to give you information that I find will be useful, as well as some exercises and things you can already do and explore with your teen at home. This is not only for teens, you can do it for younger. I had somebody who posted after doing the challenge, and she has a 7-year-old, and she was like, I was just doing this to prepare. My kid does not have a cell phone. I wasn't. And then she had the initial conversation that I suggest and found out that her 7-year-old had already seen porn.
Oh, wow.
Yep. And several other things which she had no idea, and had she not followed this and asked the question, she would have never known, because it would have never even occurred to her to ask the question.
Sure.
So even if you have younger kids, this is appropriate for you. But it's a great way to get started. If you're saying to yourselves, I don't even know where to get started with this, and you're not ready to jump into a more serious commitment, then start there.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
And thank you so much for all of your information, your wisdom. I know that, everybody is going to find this interview really valuable. So thank you so much for taking time to meet with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for your important work in this world. It is extremely important. I see it every day in my own work. And so thank you. And thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you. Awesome. I want to thank you for joining us today. Coming up tomorrow, we have two very special guests. First, we have Susan Berlin, who is going to be talking about how to support kids, either in your community or in your own family, who are coming out as gay, lesbian, transgender, or somewhere in between, and how you can navigate those tricky waters. So that's going to be a really interesting conversation. And also coming up, we have Anya Menes, and she is going to be talking about peer pressure and how you can empower your kids to resist peer pressure. So, two really great conversations, and I'm really looking forward to those. And I have a couple announcements to make. First, I'm going to do a live Q&A call on Sunday morning. That will be the 23rd of September at 10 a.m. Pacific. And I just want to get together and meet some of you. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to ask them. And I would really love to hear, like, what were some of your biggest takeaways from the interviews that we did. And I'm curious to know, what you would like to hear more about. I have interest in doing more interviews in the future. So you're invited to a live Q&A call on Sunday with me, and I don't know, I might invite some other of the speakers to join me too if they want to. So that will be fun. And also, if you would like to get the recordings, Friday is going to be the last day that you can get them for $97. So our summit special will end on Friday, and the recordings will be the full price, which is $197. So if you want to add the recordings to your library, I recommend upgrading today so that you can take advantage of our summit price. Yeah, we have more really fantastic interviews coming up. This week we're going to be talking about some of my favorite topics along the line of sex and keeping your kids safe and all that really fun, interesting, and sometimes uncomfortable conversations. So I'm really looking forward to all of that, and I hope that you'll join me. So I will see you tomorrow for our conversation with Susan Berlin and Anya Menes. So really great conversations. Don't miss them, and we'll see you tomorrow.